Hello and welcome to the LexisNexis complimentary webinar, 5 highly effective strategies for successful prospect research and how to avoid FOMO, the fear of missing information. My name is Lindsay Lambert and I'm the marketing manager here at LexisNexis, and I will be the moderator for today's session. I want to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded. Today's speaker will respond to questions after her presentation via the web. And those of you logged on to WebEx are encouraged to submit questions throughout the webinar by clicking on the question and answer button in the upper right corner of your WebEx console or in the full screen. LexisNexis is a leading global provider of legal, regulatory, and business information and analytics to help professional customers make more informed decisions, increase productivity, and serve their clients. LexisNexis Legal and Professional, which serves customers in more than 175 countries with 10,000 employees worldwide, is part of the RELEX Group, a world-leading provider of information analytics for professional and business customers across industries worldwide. Our speaker today is Helen Brown, President of the Helen Brown Group, a fundraising intelligence consulting firm based in Watertown, Massachusetts. She is co-author of Prospect Research for Fundraisers, The Essential Handbook. Helen is a past board member and longtime volunteer for the Association of Professional Researchers for Advancement, and a past president and volunteer for the New England Development Research Association. Helen is a special advisor on fundraising to the Board of North American Foundation for the University of Manchester and a fellow of the Royal Society for Arts and Manufacturers in London. She is a former non-executive director of The Factory, a prospect research consultancy in Bristol, England. Helen was honored to receive the Nedra Ann Castle Award for Service to the Prospect Research Community in 2006 and the APRA Distinguished Service Award in 2017. So with all of that, let's turn things over to Helen to begin the webinar.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much to LexisNexis for asking me to share my thoughts on prospect research FOMO, that horrible fear of missing information that happens to all of us prospect researchers probably a lot more often than we would care to admit. The fear of missing information is the leading contributor to a syndrome known as researcher's guilt. And the precursors to researcher's guilt are as follows: wasting time digging yourself into a hole where the information won't be found because it's just not available, wasting time digging in the wrong area, not being efficient with your search strategy, shiny object syndrome, where you find something that's a lot more interesting than the thing that you set out to search for in the first place, and you end up learning an awful lot about baby otters or Game of Thrones actors, and not knowing when to say when. What then ensues is a massive cloud of guilt that overshadows your day. And I'd say that the largest frustration is really just not being able to deliver on finding that piece of information that you know is going to help. But also, for most of us, it stems from just a fear of missing out on information that's out there that you're just not able to find. So fortunately, I've got some prescriptions for helping you avoid prospect research FOMO today. So let's start with that first one: trying too hard to find information that's really just not available. Usually if you've been in the prospect research business for more than a couple of years, you kind of develop a sixth sense about what is and what isn't available. And quite honestly, that really just comes down to practice. Like any profession, the more experienced you are and the more training you've had, the better you're going to know if a particular piece of information is even out there. Sometimes when you hit a roadblock, it's because you're looking for something that's nice to know rather than need to know. kind of have a feeling that you know the questions that I'm talking about. I mean, sure, it would be great to know, for example, all of the kids' names rather than some of the kids' names, or if their grandfather was a Democrat or a Republican, or if the person is a Yankees fan or a Red Sox fan. If you're having trouble turning up an answer to a specific question like that was posed by a frontline fundraiser, circle back and ask them if the answer is really critical to being able to successfully close that gift or move that prospect forward. Sometimes it's just a matter of the fundraiser being curious about a particular aspect of the prospect's life. And it's something that they could ask the donor about themselves directly. Other times, it might actually mean that bringing the prospect a Red Sox hat as a gift could end up spoiling the relationship forever. So, you know, find out, is that piece of information need to know, or is it just nice to know? Because that could really impact the amount of time that you spend searching. And it's not just the fundraiser's curiosity. I mean, we're researchers. We get paid to be curious. And sometimes you start pulling on threads and an interesting aside comes up, like that the prospect is interested in steampunk, and maybe you hadn't heard of that before, so you start researching it, and 3 hours later, before you know it, you are an expert on steampunk clothing. But you're no closer to finding that piece of information that you started looking for in the first place. But it's a thin line, I know, because sometimes diligence and pulling threads leads you to incredibly valuable information. But the key is to determine in advance, what do I really need to know? What does the frontline fundraiser need to know in order to move this prospect forward? Ultimately, that's the question that you really need to answer. And to do that, you have to be sure that you've got the right resources. So be honest with yourself. When was the last time that you took an inventory of your resources? I know it's something that kind of tends to go off on, you know, the side. It's not something that we do all the time. But, you know, was the resource list that was the list of resources that you have right now, was that determined because of the person that had the job before you, and you've just kind of always assumed, well, what we've got is what we've got? If it's been a year or more since you took a look at your resources, maybe take a look both at the ones that you use that are fee-based, but also the free ones that you use to figure out whether you actually have what you need to do the job. And then look to see, is there overlap between the resources that we've got? Are we paying for two resources that actually kind of generally provide the same information? If that's true, then, you know, make a determination. Keep the one that does the most or is the easiest to use, and then use that money for another resource that actually broadens your scope. The other thing that I think that people tend to overlook sometimes is whether or not they're being budget efficient. And by that I mean, are you using something that's free that takes you 3 times as long to get an answer as something that costs money? You know, if you're taking 3 hours to figure out something when you could have found it out in a minute by using a fee-based source, figure out how much time you could actually save. Do a side-by-side comparison. And then if it does end up that you're actually saving, you know, time, make a case for that resource, because, you know, the quicker you work, the more prospects you can research. So it really makes sense to take a look at that. And finally, take a look and see if there are any gaps in your resources. And to do that, I always recommend that organizations take a look at their prospect base. Figure out, where are they? You know, are they all in one geographical area? Or do we have a really large constituency that seems to be in one particular profession? If that's true, how are our resources for covering those specialty niches? You can also take a look at the HBG Research Resources page on our website, and that can also give you an idea of some of the resources that you might be missing. So this is my plug for continuing professional education. Vendor webinars like this one, as well as conferences and seminars that are provided by AIIP, APRA, and APRA's many awesome chapters, as well as the Association of Strategic and Competitive Intelligence, which is SCIP. Those webinars and conferences and everything are just absolutely critical if you're a beginner or even fairly new to the field. And I have to say, actually, I've been in this profession a really long time, and I learn something at every single conference I go to, so it's never a waste of money. Our profession changes, and new resources pop up every single day. So continuing education is just incredibly important, and it can help you recognize fairly quickly if the question that you have in front of you even can be answered. Outside of our profession, there are several people and resources that you can follow, and these are just a really very few of them. I love Tara Kalashane's Research Buzz. Tara's also a search expert. She's written books about searching Google, and she also produces white papers. She's got a blog. She's even got a Patreon group where you can pledge money and get insider scoops from her about. She sends white papers out on proximity searching on Google, for example, was one she sent out recently. Irina Shemaeva, she's got a great blog about search and searching called The Boolean Strings, which I absolutely love. You shouldn't miss that. She's a super search expert to follow. And speaking of experts, you really can't get any more expert than Danny Sullivan and Chris Sherman. These guys are, they've literally written the book about the hidden web and about searching. And they're just super knowledgeable people to follow. Search Engine Watch, Search Engine Journal, and Search Engine Land are also fantastic resources for keeping up on what's going on with the basic tools that we use every single day. And you can also find really great articles there with helpful hints on how to search more efficiently. Because staying current is really, really important because the tools that we use change every single day. And if you're not staying current with what's happening, you could be missing out on a much more efficient way of getting at the information that you need and the resources that are, popping up every single day in order to give us more information. So speaking of searching more efficiently, I wanted to be sure to discuss some Boolean operators that will help you search smarter. Boolean logic or Boolean operators, they're just a way to make a search engine actually pay attention to your search and give you exactly what you need. And I'm always surprised when I see people just kind of throw a bunch of words up into a search box, kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what's going to come back. When actually, just by using some of the Boolean operators, you can actually get to your answers a lot more swiftly and actually find some resources that you wouldn't have found otherwise. So make sure to look up and use advanced operators no matter what resource you're using, whether it's Google, Bing, DuckDuckGo, or a paid resource like LexisNexis. You're going to save time, which is money, and your resources are just going to be a whole lot smarter. So this is my favorite one, actually, quotation marks. Now, you could just put those three words, apple, walnut, and cake, and the search engine will give you the results for the top articles that it has cached that have those three words in them. Apple could be the first word, walnut could be the 200th word, and cake could be the 319th word. And depending on the order of the words that you put in, you're going to get different results because Google assumes that the word order actually matters to you in terms of relevance. So they're going to put apple as having more relevance than cake. But when you use quotation marks, what you're saying is, hey, I only want articles that have those three words in that order in proximity to each other. So you're just going to get results with apple, walnut, cake, just like that. Using the operator OR, and you have to use it in all caps, allows you to get all the articles that have either one of the words or the other in it. It really starts getting powerful when you add parentheses. So in this example, you can see I've indicated that I want all of the articles that have apple cake or pear cake in them. But, you know, why fool around with a search engine when you can actually go direct to a site that you know is going to have the better answer for you? You know, always go directly, just right to a good source. So you can use the operator cite : with a URL after it with no space in between. And you plug that into Google, and it actually goes and searches that site, recipes.com, for apple cake or pear cake. And you know, you can just plug it in just exactly like that. You can also tell the search engine if there are things that you do or actually do not want to see in your results. So a plus sign means I want you to make sure that this word is in my results. I want apple and walnut in my results. A minus sign or a hyphen means give me apple, but I don't want to see raisin and I don't want to see Mac or Macintosh in the results. And finally, there's a proximity search using the operator around. Now, I've kept to the Apple theme here, but actually I need to tell you that I found this particularly handy when I'm searching and I don't know a spouse's name. So you can type in quotes, Joe blogs, unquotes, around 3, parens, wife or spouse, end parens, and you can get Joe blogs and his wife, Joan, as a result. It's pretty handy. Sometimes if you're stuck, you might just keep going at it when really you should save time and gain somebody else's perspective. It not only helps you to learn something new, but we researchers, we love to be helpful. So it's also a good way to solidify a relationship with somebody else as well as allow them to feel helpful. Think about it. I mean, wouldn't you feel great if somebody called you up to ask for your advice? So try reaching out to somebody that you met at an APRA conference or at a chapter event. If you've maybe got a few days before your research is due and the person is local to you, buy them a cup of coffee or lunch in exchange for picking their brain. Also, our professional listserv, ProspectL, is a great place to go and get advice and good pointers. Just remember always to keep any confidential details confidential. Don't be putting out any prospects' names out there on ProspectL. Another largely and actually pretty sadly untapped source of information are reference librarians. I love them. They are fonts of knowledge. They can help you discover resources that you may not have known existed. And they can also help suggest search strategies too. When I've been stumped, the librarians at the Kirstein Business Library at the Boston Public Library have been incredibly helpful. And last but not least, if you're using LexisNexis and you're having trouble with your search, tech support has actually always been really helpful to me in suggesting resources or search strategies when I couldn't figure out how to pull out what I knew was in there. They've even suggested alternative databases to the ones that I was using, that I had in LNDP, which is Nexis for Development Professionals, and also just helping me figure out what a great advanced search strategy would be. If you've tried every single thing, then sometimes the information that you're looking for, it just isn't out there in the public domain. Especially if you're researching international prospects for private companies, it can be super frustrating and you may be really reluctant to stop, and I totally get that. And you know, I get it. Diligence is something that is highly prized in any good researcher. We certainly don't want somebody who does a half-baked job. But if you've tried everything and you still haven't found anything new, it's probably time to move on to the next research project, because you never know. You could be wasting time researching somebody only to figure out or find out later that actually it was the next person that you researched who was the person who went on to make that major gift. So set a deadline for yourself. The moment that you start getting frustrated because you're not finding anything, look up at the clock. You can keep searching if you want to, but at that moment, give yourself a deadline to do a hard stop after another 15 minutes. Here at HBG, we call that pencils down time, because it's like at the end of the SAT test. They're like pencils down, and you just have to stop. And having that deadline also helps alleviate some of that prospect research guilt too. You knew, you did your very best, you worked it, you called a friend, all of that stuff, and you just have to just let it go. And it allows you to sort of let it go. But before you quit, and it's something that the fundraiser has told you that they really do need to know, it is need to know, it's not just nice to know, set up an alert on your search so that if something does end up coming through in a news article or whatever in the coming weeks or months, you're not going to miss it. And then, finally, just quit. Forget about it. Shake it off. Move on to the next assignment. So those are my strategies for getting the most out of your prospect research and for avoiding, to the best of your ability, prospect research FOMO. So determine what information is really critical to know. Figure out if you've got the right tools for the job. Take advantage of continuing education and keep educating yourself to stay up with trends. Learn how to search the tools that you do have, like a ninja. Don't be afraid to ask somebody else for help. And then give yourself permission to move on to the next assignment and leave that guilt behind. And with that, I'd like to say thank you again to everybody here for participating in the webinar, and also thank you to you, Lindsay, and everybody at LexisNexis for inviting me to be here today.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Helen. That was definitely an informative presentation. At this time, we're going to go ahead and open the lines up for any questions. And so if you do have questions, you can go ahead and submit a question by clicking on the question and answer icon on WebEx, or you can chat us if that's easier. So let's go ahead, Helen, and take a look at a couple of these questions that have come in. Let's see. One question we have is, we don't really have a budget for many resources. It's pretty frustrating. Do you have any suggestions?
Oh, yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. So one of the places that I mentioned before, which is the HBG Research Resources page, it's on our website, and there's tons and tons of free resources there. So that's a really good place to go if you haven't checked it out, just to see, and there's international resources there too, because a lot of the times just finding information on international prospects is really difficult. So, go ahead, take a look there and see if you see anything. Also, I would suggest also to maybe get a day or week-long trial or whatever it is of a resource that you would like to get, something that you think has the information that you want to have, and do a side-by-side test using that resource and the free source that you normally use, and see how long it takes you to get that same answer. Or, to be honest, sometimes it's also good to, if there's somebody that's in your group that is the person that determines your budget, getting them in the room for the trial or the test of that product really can help get buy-in for them to say, oh, wow, this really does have the information that we need to be able to research those particular prospects. So, so that's another idea. Also, if your budget really is limited, then taking advantage of as many all-in-one resources as you can. It might be a good idea. You know, things like LNDP, like iWave, like Donor Search, if they bundle a lot of the different tools that you could use all into one source, it's actually a pretty great budgetary efficiency to be able to get a bundled product like that to, you know, to help you get at more resources than you would ordinarily be able to subscribe to separately.
Great. Another question that we have is, what resources do you use to keep current on trends?
Oh, well, okay, so besides following the search experts that I mentioned before, I use Twitter a lot. I have really made an effort to create lists of search professionals, prospect research professionals, but also general search professionals as well. I pay attention to those lists. I see what these people are tweeting. It's really amazing what I've learned. I mean, I know that Twitter kind of has a bad rap about this, but if you use it really in a smart way, it can lead you to just some great thinkers and people putting out a lot of great, useful information about just search generally and tools and that sort of thing. I also read a lot of blogs, like Dan Russell's Search Research, Phil Bradley's blog. Try saying that 5 times really fast. Phil Bradley's blog, and PI Buzz. So I try to read as many people that are in sort of general search or in competitive intelligence, fields that are sort of closely related to ours, and see what resources that they use and see what they recommend, the tools that that they're recommending. So I guess social media. I use social media a lot to sort of keep up on what's happening with trends in our field. And, you know, of course, as I mentioned before, just going to NEDRA seminars and APRA conferences and webinars and things like that. Those are also really, really important.
Absolutely. And we do have a couple of more questions that have come in, but in the spirit of making sure that we end on time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with Helen to get answers to all of your questions, and then we'll follow up via email. We'll also be sending an email with a tip sheet with some of the best practices from this webinar and some more information as far as resources available to you. So thank you again so much, Helen, for such an informative presentation. If you're interested in learning more about development research, we will be sending out a complimentary tip sheet which summarizes the best practice shared in this webinar. We're also offering 25% off to all attendees of this webinar today on our research solution, Nexis for Development Professionals. So please keep an eye out for that email with more details. And as we close out this webinar, you will be presented with a short survey where you can give feedback on today's presentation, as well as request follow-up information from LexisNexis and get a personalized demo and quote if interested. So thank you all so much for joining. If you do have questions, I see several have come in. As I said, we will follow up via email, and we hope that you have a wonderful day. Thanks again so much, Helen.
Thank you.